Hello and welcome to Road to Future Cities, Atlanta, Georgia, a GovExec TV series in partnership with the National League of Cities. I'm your host, George Jackson. The evolution of and use cases for artificial intelligence continue to advance at a rapid clip. Local leaders are already deploying those cutting-edge technologies to improve city services, make their workforces more efficient, and raise user satisfaction for constituents. Today, the NLC Centennial Roadshow makes a stop here in Atlanta, Georgia, to talk about the future of AI at the local level. Joining me here live in Atlanta, Georgia, we have Lylan Hester. She is head of Southeast External Affairs and Government Relations at Google. Ma'am, thanks so much for carving out a little time for us today. Right next to me, Doug Shipman. He is president of the Atlanta City Council. Good to meet you, sir.
Great to have you in Atlanta.
His colleague, Jason Sankey, is Chief Information Officer for the City of Atlanta. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Ma'am, last but not least, Deborah Lamb. She is founding Executive Director of Partnership for Inclusive Innovation at Georgia Tech. Thank you.
Could be.
So, kick us off, Doug. Give me a sense of the policies in place for the City of Atlanta. What's on the books right now?
So actually there's not much. In some ways, a lot of this policy resides at the state level in Georgia. A lot of the policy is made by the state legislature. It's still fairly open as far as the regulatory environment. I think that's because we haven't had a lot of issues come to the public for, and so there hasn't been a reaction to that. So we are implementing AI in various ways that Jason can speak to in customer interfacing, resident interfacing, infrastructure management. But from a policy perspective, quite honestly, it's not something that we have talked too much about within the last few years.
Talk a little bit about that policy and technology connection there, if you would. When you're trying to identify gaps that need to be addressed by policy, how do you do that in a technological fashion? What are you looking for?
So that's an interesting question because policy alone is just that. It's policy. So I'll use an example. When the ban of TikTok came around, there was a lot of policy around how do you ban TikTok. So I had some conversations with federal government leaders as well as state leaders say, okay, so how do you implement this from a technology perspective? And there was a lot of, we don't know yet. So there's a lot of policy that leads technology, but you need to kind of go hand in hand, because if you have a policy that says, hey, you can't get on TikTok, but someone gets on TikTok, you break the policy, but you don't stop the ban. So that technology piece really needs to go hand in hand with policy. And when you talk about AI, it's the same way, because one thing that we want to do is we want to protect data, right? That's one of the most important things. There's sensitive data with the government. We want to make sure that's protected. When you go into something like an open AI and you share sensitive data, now it's out there, it's open. So it's how do we put controls in place where the policy is actually supported by technology.
The thing that I would say too is I think for us, it has been less about residents or voters saying, please implement AI. We want more of that in our lives. I think it's more that they will say, we want a better interface when it comes to our water situation, when it comes to navigating government services, when it comes to making sure that, you know, the trash pickup works in the way that it should. And so I think for us, it's been less about making specific AI policy, and it's been more about here's a problem, and can we solve that through the use of technology, especially AI? And then is there a policy prescription required in order to implement that? So it's really in that order from my perspective. It's problem, technology, and then is there a policy that's either an impediment or that can be a catalyst to bringing that to fruition?
Deborah, those advancements, you know, from an outside observer's perspective, Atlanta has a huge advantage in the proximity to Georgia Tech. You have students, you have interns, you have basically this hub of innovation happening right next door. Can you talk about some of the work that's being done with those interns?
Well, just to take a step back is what Doug and Jason have outlined is just the difficulties of really putting a framework around AI, because we look at infrastructure on 3 levels, right? The first one is the physical, right? So your bridges, your roads, your dams, your built environment. And for local government, that's very easy to control, right? Like it's very much within their orbit. You can see it, as Doug was saying, the street lights, like garbage pickup, etc. The second level is the virtual infrastructure, and that's where AI comes in, right? And the third level is the people and how they interact between the virtual and the physical. And so what makes it hard is that who controls the virtual infrastructure? Where does the data live? Do you have oversight on it? Are you able to enforce it in the same way that you're able to enforce the physical infrastructure? And so that's where universities come in terms of helping to create the framework and support and working hand in hand with private sector companies and industries to help guide, what are the appropriate sets of carrots and sticks that could help frame a better security apparatus and implementation and application apparatus around a virtual infrastructure that doesn't have, a concrete, defined border or defined jurisdiction. And so one example that we have a team of students working on is actually with the Metro Lab Network, which is a national network of city universities across the country. And we are looking at a generative AI policy framework for local government in terms of how do you actually have policies inform local government to look at cybersecurity, look at public safety, look at applications and usage that is relevant for local government in terms of a day-to-day, but not be overwhelmed by just this virtual infrastructure that they don't have the proper parameters to really control and manage. It goes back to what Doug is saying, is just streetlights, garbage, day in and day out operations that citizens can see and ultimately they care about in terms of service and quality.
Lylan, let's step back from Atlanta specifically for a moment and put on your Southeast hat here for me. I mean, you work with governments all across that part of the country when they're in a similar place. They're trying to stand up strategy tied to artificial intelligence. Where do a lot of them go wrong? What are the speed bumps or hurdles that they're running into?
Well, first of all, at Google, we have had AI for many years from the very beginning of Google. Some of y'all remember PageRank from back in the day. And now, Google's one of the first companies that has a set of principles around AI. And our keys are beneficial use with the avoidance of harm. And so we offer up what we're doing at Google as an example of how you develop an AI strategy. How do you work to determine where those different triggers are? Now, throughout the Southeast United States, I have seen lots of different efforts around AI. Mostly, like here in Georgia, a lot of your lawmakers are looking at study committees. There's an AI study committee here in Georgia. I believe there's one about to start in North Carolina. There's also some in Connecticut and other states. And what these AI study committees are going to do is for lawmakers to gather folks from the academic higher ed community, to gather folks from different cities, and to gather your private sector to find out what they don't know. And then together, they'll usually create a report at the end of getting the information from us. And then from that, they'll determine what their next steps are going to be. How does a state tackle something that is a really large issue? So, AI has huge benefits, but there are also the downsides to AI. And that's what when working with our cities, are very concerned about. There are the concerns around disinformation that has to be made apparent upfront, and you have to create ways on how to address those issues around disinformation.
Doug, you were talking about that before we went on the air here, disinformation, misinformation, tied back to trust. Trust for the employees who work for Atlanta institutions, trust for the constituents that you have to serve. As you begin building out robust AI policies, how do you start to imbue them with trust? What are some of the key focal areas for you?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we're trying to deploy AI to, as Deborah said, improve services or to help people navigate, right? Help people understand. Sometimes local government can seem very overwhelming for very simple things. Who do I call for? Fill in the blank. And so I think that we have to make sure that that people understand when they're interfacing with an AI as opposed to a person. Because if they think that they're interfacing with one and they're actually interfacing with the other, trust in the entire system can break down, right? So how transparent do we need to be this interface is powered by AI, assisted by AI. It's actually an avatar. I think that's going to be very important to maintain trust. I think also when there's a breakdown, how do we communicate that breakdown when something didn't go the way that it should, so that people understand that it is a technology? I think residents understand technology doesn't always work perfectly, but these kinds of AI interfaces can feel very, very human. And so I think we have to make sure that we, when we have a problem, are being very clear with folks about that. And then from a disinformation standpoint, I think that from an elected official perspective, there's concern about how can it shape what people are hearing when they think that it's news, but it's not necessarily news. And so that really is incumbent around how do we do press releases and how do we do communications more generally, not only about AI, but more broadly about policies that we're making and about things that we're doing at the city level, because we know that there will be these headwinds around disinformation, and not just specifically, but people just saying, I'm not sure what I can trust at all. And so I think we have to be even more clear about how do we communicate on what kind of cadence, and how do you know when it's coming from the city?
Jason, you used the word avatar. To my understanding, you're experimenting with that as we speak. Can you share a little bit with the audience there?
Sure. So we're looking at an AI avatar kiosk that we would put in City Hall to help citizens, businesses, as they come in, to know where to navigate, to know where they need to go. The city can be a very confusing place. The website can be very confusing, and we want to make things more streamlined and easy. So having that interface, if someone does not want to interact with another human, they have another avenue to connect with the city and get services that will provide them the direction that they need to go. So what we look at is what are the data points where the most people reach out to the city. And believe it or not, it's water bills. And people want to know how do they pay for water, how do they move that forward. So within the kiosk, the thought is they can go in and they can pay their water bill right through the kiosk, figuring out how to make things easy. But we're doing it as a proof of concept because we also don't want to frustrate the community. We don't want people to come in and say, I don't want to do this. Well, you don't have to. We want to make things easy for you. So we're doing this POC just to see whether or not it will make things easier for our community.
I'd like to get back to trust, and I'd love your perspective on this, but also you, Lila, jump in if you want, Deborah, but trust can also really be rooted around the security of the data that those citizens plug into AI or use to interact with the IT systems that the City of Atlanta uses. Can you talk a bit about how you look at trust from a rollout standpoint? I'm assuming that starts at the very beginning. Am I reading that right?
You are. So we have an AI steering committee that we started recently, and we look at this PED model, we call it. Protect. What's most important is protecting information, protecting data. Educate, making sure people know what it is that they're doing and how we're rolling out these technologies and how they can use them. Because the last thing we would want is to roll anything out, whether it be internal to employees or externally, where you don't know what it is or why we're doing it. And then lastly, deployment, making sure that we look at the organizational change management and how it impacts both internal staff, external community, so that way we're not rolling anything out without looking at protecting data, educating to make sure people are aware, and then deploying in a more controlled fashion, controlled environment.
How does that communication around the security of data work when cities, counties, local institutions are working with a cloud service provider?
So at Google, the protection of the data is very important. It starts even at the data center. In order to get on a data center site, even though I'm a Googler, I don't have access to it. It requires special permission. When it comes to data, and especially with AI, we really insist that folks disclose that they have used an AI tool. Imagine back in the day when we were doing our term papers and you had to cite your sources. It's important now to really cite, like, did you yourself write this? And if you didn't, you have to disclose it. And we strongly encourage that. That's also part of our principles.
Privacy is a key consideration, right, Deborah?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, as well as trust, for us, one of the biggest things is knowledge and application, right? In order to build the trust or have the trust, you need to know about it, be informed about it, having some type of experience or use it, and then have that trust. You don't just earn the trust right away. And what we found in a recent survey, actually, that was just published earlier this week by the University of Oxford with YouGov, and they interviewed or did online surveys of 6 countries across the world: Argentina, Denmark, France, US, Japan, and the UK. So a variety of different countries. And it was an online survey, meaning that you already segmented the population who was already pretty literate, savvy in terms of information. And what was amazing among the different findings was 20 to 30% of those surveyed online had never used AI, right? So you're starting from that. Like, they have access, they have the ability to do it, but they've never used it. And then the divisions are wider between older populations and younger. So younger populations obviously had higher usage of it and felt more positively about the potential application of it. And older populations, were less likely to use it and did not have as positive a viewpoint on AI and its usage. So we're starting with that kind of divide. And again, this is only those that were able to do something online, let alone when we work in smaller, more rural communities, especially with many of the cities that might not necessarily have the broadband infrastructure, the literacy, the know-how to really even apply AI. That kind of digital divide is something that we care a lot about. Is at the end of the day, back to what Doug and Jason are saying, how is AI as a technology and a tool servicing the people and the population? What is the value of it? But if you don't trust it, you don't know about it, you don't know how to use it, then you have to really actually look at each of those factors in order to be empowered by that AI tool, in addition to building those security parameters that we've talked about.
And to add on to that, education is key. At Google, we rolled out, working with Coursera, an AI Essentials program. It has a few modules. You work at your own pace. I actually took it myself. It got 100. And all these modules, it basically explains the basics of AI. It explains what are prompts. It explains what exactly is AI, what is machine learning, and it gives you just enough to understand, and it makes things clearer for a very beginning audience. This is not someone who's like a computer scientist would probably be very bored with it. But for someone like a family member or someone who's really getting into AI or someone who's trying to have those conversations in the office, it would be very helpful.
We looked at the future of workforce recently, and obviously there's a lot of fears, in terms of AI and what the future of work will look like in terms of replacement. And the quote that we really embrace is that AI is not necessarily going to replace your job, but someone who knows how to use AI better could, right? And so at the end of the day, how do you build the literacy and the knowledge to actually apply it into your job, especially at the local government level? How can AI be better in terms of improving your quality of life and improving your ability to serve the citizens and populations at large? That is the bigger question that we're looking at.
Bridging that gap, Jason, strikes me as particularly challenging for you on this panel because you have digital natives that are coming into the workforce. You have folks that have been there for a while. How do you bring those two groups together? What sort of approaches do you put in place so that everybody is ready for this coming wave?
So we have a process where we look at skill sets and we upskill talent. We just partnered with Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, and we rolled that out through the department, and they have modules similar to Google where you actually go through and you get certified at the end. So that way that you're keeping up with the latest technologies, the latest trend. Every employee has that. And it also gives us an opportunity to see where folks are and what the appetite is, because some people may have been in their job for 20 years and they don't want to learn AI. They don't want to learn some of the advanced technologies, and that's okay. But we need to figure out what's the right fit for that employee. but also support them in their space. Because what I look at within my department is, how do I build a workforce that is proud to come to work, not afraid to come to work because of all of the change that's in place. So at the end of the day, I want the city of Atlanta to be the best place to work and people to be proud to say, I work for the city of Atlanta. So we don't want to bear existing staff, some of our more seasoned staff. We want to make sure that we produce an environment where if you want to learn new technologies, you can. And then we also balance with, as we look at recruiting and making sure that we create pipelines with our partners at Georgia Tech, at Georgia State, at Kennesaw State, at Morehouse, to have a pipeline of talent that constantly comes through the organization.
Doug, are there times where you have to look to your constituents and say, whoa, pump the brakes? I mean, large language models and the impact from a just society perspective, they can just log on, plug stuff in, crank out answers or context or whatever else. But from a city level, like, there are more levels of responsibility, sort of more gates that you have to pass through. Do you have to consciously make people slow down a bit sometimes?
Sure, the office will get calls and people will say, I don't understand why we haven't deployed this at the city yet to make XYZ process that much easier for me, or to improve XYZ service delivery. I think we are very advantageous. We have an advantage in Atlanta in that we have a massive airport that so many people go through. Delta is based here, and Delta has put AI into some of their customer interfaces, sort of anticipating questions and the kind of information that they give to you, or if you ask X question, you get Y and Z answer because it's anticipating what else is on your mind. Same thing at our stadium. There's something called Ask Uncle Arthur blank, the owner of the Falcons and the Atlanta United, and it's the interface when you go to the stadium that you can basically use AI to ask questions about the stadium. So sometimes it's translating for residents. Here is what was actually happening in the city. And then to your point, here's why we can't quite go there as quickly, because we have these other sorts of responsibilities to you as a resident. But I think reframing AI as anticipatory intelligence often helps residents to say, we're trying to basically deploy these technologies to anticipate what you need when you come to City Hall, where we need to fix the pipes ahead of them breaking, et cetera. But in order to do that, here are the responsibilities we have to basically balance between the desire to put these things into place and the responsibilities that we have around security and such that we talked about.
Deborah, I'd love for you to double down on that for a moment. And in the context of partnership, I feel like the ecosystem that you have here is relatively unique. How does that work from a communication standpoint, a delivery standpoint? Why is partnership so important to what Atlanta's doing in AI?
Yeah, well, I think thanks to people like here on this panel, like, Atlanta is just so rich in the ecosystem of partnership. And in part, I think it's Atlanta knows that, there's a lot of things going on, but no one sector can do it alone. Like, the city can't do it alone. Universities certainly can't. Private sector can't do it alone. But if we combine forces, we can certainly tackle the complexity of all the problems that we're facing and try to do it together in terms of these broader goals. And that's the opportunity that it presents, right? Like, the opportunity of willingness to share the risk and the resources, knowing, again, it's not burdened by anyone, but know that the sum is greater than each of the individual parts, and that we can all achieve that goal together. And that's what's really exciting about, the leadership that the mayor has brought in, and obviously all the community and civic and private sector leaders coming together. Doug's example of, AI and the chatbots is really great in the sense that, one, you can use technology to help with a portion of the work, then it frees you up to focus on the more complex work that AI can't solve. Because at the end of the day, what AI can't replace is relationships and the partnerships that we're describing, right? Like, you can have AI do a lot of the initial data intensive kind of work, especially if you have the data and you've cleaned up the data. But at the end of the day, what comes together is the relationships and the partnerships, and AI can never replace that.
There are many tools out there, and at Google, we have everything from a tree canopy program. We have a tool called Delve, which is one that cities are starting to work with, where Delve, you can put in information about the different projects that are planned for the city. And you can do a model of what your city is going to look like when XYZ building goes here and what those impacts are going to be. But it's the leadership that is key, because if there isn't the leadership that says, you know what, as the city of Atlanta, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, then it won't get done. It's just a tool. But that's what's so wonderful about Atlanta. You have it from the top. You have your CIO from the mayor down, who are very passionate about making sure that Atlanta is a forward-looking city, and how can tech be used to the benefit of the people of the city.
We've covered a ton of ground. We're almost out of time, but I want all four of you to put on your futurist hats for me for a moment. And Lylan, I'll start with you. What benefits are we going to start seeing at the local level relative to artificial intelligence now in the very near future?
Well, when it comes to just for the people, I'll start with it. Anything around healthcare, I think, is where I find AI to me the most fascinating. And there's so much that we just don't know yet, because there are a lot of pilots out there. But think about how the information that you have about a family, a family that has been going to medical facilities for many generations, and taking all of that data to be able to predict what could be the next illness that may impact a family member, and how would you avoid it in some way 3 generations ahead by looking at data from 2 generations back. I find that to be the most fascinating. For a city, it's kind of the tools that we do on the Atlanta Beltline right now. Right now we have AI benches, or I would say Wi-Fi benches. And with Wi-Fi benches, you're along the Beltline. You know that at some point you might want to sit down, and at some point you might want to charge up your phone. And so we worked with the city and said, well, what about putting those 2 together? And then they're powered on solar energy. And for the future, I think it's just vast. But I think along with that, as long as those policies are in place and that it's something that benefits the folks of the city, I think that's the true win. Because to have something futuristic out there and folks are like, I don't know about all that, but if it's something that they can support, make their day-to-day lives better, I think it's a win.
Yep.
I love the example of the Atlanta Beltline. It's such a gem in the city. And I was actually thinking any infrastructure transportation type project, because it's rich in data. Like infrastructure transportation projects have a lot of data. And what we've already started to do is some projects that give you a more efficient transit route. So the drivers know, where to pick up on demand and really get them to the places faster and more convenient. Or think about in terms of electric charging stations, like when is the best time to charge your electric vehicle that, has the lowest rates, that's not at peak, etc. So anything that has lots of data, AI can make it more efficient in terms of routes, in terms of charging. Those, I think, are the really big opportunities immediately, because we have it and we have the infrastructure and you can build it. I think the longer term is like we were saying earlier, the literacy. How to ensure that all levels of population have the literacy to actually apply it and make improvements into their day-to-day life. I think that's a much longer play, but immediate is really around the transportation and infrastructure.
Sure.
If I went back in time and said, did I think the internet would be as big as it is today? The answer to that is no. AI will be bigger than the internet, and our possibilities are endless. And I'll take a kind of a fun path on this futuristic idea. I remember the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise. Believe it or not, I think that was over 20 years ago. Yeah. Great movie. But I see predicting crime before it happens. We have an integrated camera system. We have over 40,000 integrated cameras in the city of Atlanta. And just the potential power of what we can do with that data. We're looking at case studies where we want to make sure, as we talk through AI and technology and advancement, that everyone has the same opportunities. So do you have access to fresh food? Do you have access to health care? Do you have, are you in a neighborhood that is high in crime? Using the data and AI to predict what areas we need to put extra resources in to help the city, that's already in flight. So I think the opportunities are endless. And at one point, I'm gonna be in my office on this board that is Minority Report like, and be able to say we need to focus here.
I think all of those things are true. It's almost like the health of the city and using AI to anticipate how to make the city healthier with less resources. I think when I heard your question, I think Atlanta particularly has a special role to play when it comes to diversity of leadership in the development of AI. We know that AI in many ways is only as good as the way that it is designed and programmed. It can have biases if we're not careful. It can exclude if we're not careful. Atlanta, because of these partnerships that Deborah spoke about, our HBCUs, our incredible workforce, our blend of technology and humanities, I think that we can actually be a city that leads the country, and maybe even broader on an international basis, of how do we make AI fair, how do we make AI inclusive, how do we make AI reflective of the values that we all want to hold from different cultural backgrounds, different racial backgrounds. That's my hope, is that Atlanta can bring some of that almost civil rights legacy thinking to this incredibly new and important landscape.
Wonderful conversation with Doug Shipman, President of the Atlanta City Council, Jason Sankey, Chief Information Officer for the City of Atlanta, Deborah Lamb, Founding Executive Director of Partnership for Inclusive Innovation at Georgia Tech, and last but not least, Lylan Hester, Head of Southeast External Affairs and Government Relations at Google. Thanks all so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. A final thanks to the National League of Cities for making programs like this one possible. Road to Future Cities will make 2 more stops in 2024, so register for them all at govexec.com/events. For GovExec TV, I'm George Jackson on assignment in Atlanta, Georgia. Have a great day.